Hello everyone, I'm Juby Umbog and this time we are going to discuss about the methods of marking grammatical errors. Grammatical error, it is a simple mistake in terms of writing or speaking. It is an error that goes against the rule. Some examples of grammatical errors. First, we have verb errors, punctuation errors, sentence structure, plurals or singular error, and subject-verb agreement, and so on. Some examples of grammatical errors. First, we have verb errors, punctuation errors, sentence structure, plurals or singular error, and subject-verb agreement, and so on. Example number 1. My car beautiful. We have subject and we have adjective. The error in our example is our verb. So what will be the possible verb that we can use in a sentence? It should be the verb is, because our subject is singular. So the sentence should be my car is beautiful. Example number 2. Last week I cried. What will be the possible grammatical errors in our sentence? It should be our past tense. So when we say last week, it is past, and our adjective should be past tense. Our sentence will goes like this. Last week I cried. From the word cry to past tense should be the word cried. Example number 1. My car beautiful. We have subject and we have adjective. The error in our example is our verb. So what will be the possible verb that we can use in a sentence? It should be the verb is, because our subject is singular. So the sentence should be my car is beautiful. Number 1 method of marking grammatical errors. Fix all errors for the student, becoming essentially a line editor. This strategy doesn't help the student and it creates an unrealistic amount of work for the instructor. Usually the teacher will give allotted time in fixing all the errors of the students, and the student will just rewrite all the fixing errors, and they are just like spoon feeding because they are just going to rewrite all the errors because the teacher was already fixed it. Number 2 method, mark but don't correct all errors, asking students to revise. This method is attractive because the responsibility for fixing the error falls to the student, who is challenged to understand, then correct the errors they made. It is time-consuming for the instructor, however, and doesn't provide an opportunity for students to develop their own proofreading skills since they aren't required to find their own errors. Number 2 method, mark but don't correct all errors, asking students to revise. This method is attractive because the responsibility for fixing the error falls to the student, who is challenged to understand, then correct the errors they made. It is time-consuming for the instructor, however, and doesn't provide an opportunity for students to develop their own proofreading skills since they aren't required to find their own errors. Number 3 method, line edit some errors, then ask students to fix the rest. This might take the form of the instructor editing one paragraph but leaving one paragraph unmarked. So, giving students an edited paragraph can be useful in helping students see what their errors are and possible corrections. However, marking and fixing errors requires a significant amount of time, attention, and experience. Also, some argue that fixing any errors for students discourages them from working to fix errors on their own and encourages a passive approach to proofreading. It can also send the message that the most important part of revision is correcting grammar errors rather than rewriting for development of ideas or the argument, organization, or other content-related elements. Number 4 method, identify but don't correct some errors, asking students to revise and or find errors, similar errors in the unmarked section of their paper. The advantage to this method is that it gives students feedback on the errors that they are making while also encouraging active proofreading on their part. By alerting students to the type of error they are making, instructors are giving feedback that contributes to development of effective proofreading. To encourage students to proofread their paper, assuming the instructor is marking a final draft, the student might be required to edit the final draft further before receiving a final grade. Number 5 method. Use minimal marking to let students know there are errors but don't locate or identify errors for them. This method encourages students to find and fix their own errors. The goal is to help students develop the habit of proofreading their own writing. It also avoids sending the message that the goal of the revision is solely to fix grammar errors. With minimal marking, the students should be encouraged to find and fix the errors. One strategy is for the instructor to raise the grade when the edited paper is returned, or for the instructor to hold off on grading until the draft has been edited. Number 6 method. Don't mark any errors but give the student feedback that the paper is marked with errors and will lose points. These methods will have an advantage that a big time saver for the instructor, because usually the time will be given to the students, and the other advantages is no responsibility on the instructor to help the student develop editing skills. But if there are advantages, there will be the disadvantage of this method, and the disadvantages are students may feel criticized and supported, leading to feelings of depression and isolation, and the students are not encouraged to develop helpful academic skills. Marking and editing strategies are: first, color coding and highlighting; second, correction symbols; and the third is minimal marking. Color coding and highlighting, it is similar to error codes. Color coding and highlighting uses a previously explained system for marking errors. Color coding and highlighting. Similar to error codes, color coding and highlighting uses previously explained system for marking errors. This saves time when marking papers. Students often find it much easier to understand a document with different colored highlights than a document with scribbled, difficult to read shorthand markings. Correction symbols. This represents a relatively short list of correction symbols. Adopting a similar key and sharing it with your students at the beginning of the term can help streamline marking and discussing writing throughout the semester. This can be useful because it helps develop a common language for describing and identifying errors. Longer and more detailed chart can be developed depending on your goals, time limitations, and level of comfort working with students on these errors. Often, though, especially in a class not dedicated to editing practice, restricting your marking to a limited number of errors will be more effective. In this picture shown, those are the symbols and the meaning of the symbols and also the examples for the correction symbols. In this picture shown the proofreading marks, which is there are marks with meanings and also the examples to easily identify what are the grammar errors in the sentence or in a phrase. Minimal marking. There are various forms of minimal marking, ranging from highlighting or underlining errors without making comments to writing question marks, or check marks in the margin to alert students to errors. An important aspect of this approach is to withhold a grade until the revisions are made, or often to raise the grade once the revisions are made. This is the example of minimal marking, which is there are only marks or underline there. Then not necessary the teacher or instructor to use comments or put comments on the margin or in the sentence. Just only the marks and underline that they being used to identify which is the errors of the students. Minimal marking allows students to work toward their goals of writing that is clean and error-free. While I do not allow sentence level errors or their correction to affect the project's evaluation, and students cannot receive credit for completing the project until the minimal marking process helps students recognize, diagnose, and correct their own typical errors without overburdening the instructor or overwhelming students by marking every error in a project. This is an example of minimal marking, and those are the symbols that the teacher use instead of writing comments. That will be all, and I hope you learned something from my discussion. Thank you and God bless.